Dr. Kellogg's was a gentleman who was a vegetarian. He didn't like meat. He believed that people need to eat carbohydrates. He had a health farm in the early part of the 1900s in the Midwest, near where my mother was brought up. And he realized that we had trouble eating grain. And so he prepared the grain in a certain way so people could eat it.
His early work was fairly profound in raising the awareness, at least here in America, that food mattered in terms of health.
Dr. Kellogg had the sanatorium where he was pushing a plant-based, high-fiber diet. So there was a gradual transition from a hearty breakfast that was meat and eggs or oatmeal with butter and cream to the breakfast cereals with skim milk.
It was actually his brother that took on the whole role of Kellogg's cornflakes. And you know, growing up in the 60s and 70s, Kellogg's cornflakes was the food to eat.
Those Kellogg cornflakes are wonderful. Well, do you know anyone who doesn't like Kellogg's cornflakes? Not a solitary soul.
Really important problem at the time was that people were not getting enough calories. And unfortunately that then exploded, and I think in a direction that was maybe not anticipated at the time.
Now, if you know your oats and want to feel your oats.
The initial rationale for breakfast cereals was quite noble, right? Let's create a shelf-stable product that is going to allow people to get the calories they need to not die of starvation. Unfortunately, from there, it went to a place where now all of our calories are shelf-stable and convenient and devoid of actual vital nutrition.
By the time we got to the 60s and 70s, they were fortifying it with minerals as well as vitamins.
We've had to add vitamins and minerals to it in order to deal with malnutrition.
The whole idea of fortification is we've taken out the bran and the germ, and so we're going to put these vitamins back in to replace them. They can hardly replace what we've taken out.
The whole biological system has a natural way of working where when nutrients are present, they're present in context, and the context is everything else that's in that nutrient.
Where are they getting these minerals from, and where are they getting these vitamins from? They're not getting them from food sources, they're actually getting them from chemical laboratories or mining them from the ground. There was a gentleman by the name of Norman Borlaug, and he was a scientist that worked for the Corn and Wheat Board. And they were wanting to mechanize the production of wheat. What his ultimate aim was, and I think it was a noble aim, was to feed starving countries such as India and Pakistan. And they called it the Green Revolution.
The Green Revolution performed two roles. First, it created a market for the chemicals that had no markets after the war, but it also allowed a different path for rural transformation.
Monocultures in the landscape meant that there were more chemicals being put down. So a monoculture is where it's just one field of wheat or one field of soya or one field of corn, and as a result of that, and as a result of the chemicals that were being used and the unhealthiness of these plants, it all led to these plants becoming less and less resistant to disease and needing more and more chemicals in order to survive any pests that may want to eat them. The hybridized wheat grain from different countries that would never have hybridized naturally together.
The physics of this is that the shortening of the stem allowed more weight to be carried on top of the plant. The other thing was that it could be harvested a lot faster because you didn't have as much chaff. But see, in olden days, the chaff, the straw, the leftovers from the seed head, those were just as valuable as the seeds for bedding livestock.
We had bred plants for balance, to give food for animals through the straw, and humans through the grain.
By the end of 1945, which was the end of the war, The people that were producing the chemicals for warfare began creating the chemicals for our agriculture. Instead of looking at the health of the plant, they looked at the yield of the plant.
The wheat that has been developed now was developed for commercial reasons. It produces a much higher yield and is far more profitable to grow, and it's easier to grow.
Wheat is in everything. It's in everything, it's everywhere. And I think because it's such a subsidized crop, so it becomes such a cheap ingredient. So if you need an ingredient that is an anti-caking agent, well, you can use wheat starch. If you need an ingredient that's a binder, you can get a different chemical that's derived from wheat. You can use every part of wheat. So a lot of the chemicals that we see in processed foods, in cosmetics, in cleaners, in shampoos, they come from the byproduct of wheat production for foodstuffs. And so we end up trying to use every part. We find uses for these chemicals that used to be thrown away and should be thrown away.
Wheat and gluten can be in many different forms, things as straight as wheat germ oil, right through things like wheat proteins. You can get, there's definitely different forms of wheat that we put into the products that have gluten in them, and often they're used as emulsifiers or emollients, or they're used as surfactants. They're often used to help retain moisture in the skin, so they are definitely a part of the skincare world.
For me, I'm always very, very careful in picking what products. We don't even have Play-Doh in my house because it's made with wheat. I don't notice an immediate reaction if I use a shampoo that has gluten, but I notice it build up over time, that I'm starting to just feel less energetic. I'm starting to see joint pain, so I'm starting to see signs of inflammation in my body.
Modern wheat has at least 10 applications of chemicals from start to finish, starting with a spray they put on the seeds to make them sprout. They have hormone sprays to make their stalks strong, hormone sprays to make them come into seed all at the same time, and then they have fumigants in the warehouse. So all of these chemicals are applied to wheat, and that's just the beginning. That's before they start processing.
Glyphosate is the active ingredient in the pervasive herbicide Roundup, which is used in chemical agriculture extensively and also used on people's lawns. And it's unregulated, very poorly monitored actually, and very poorly measured. The glyphosate in the wheat is causing such a train wreck in the body that it's no wonder that we can't eat the wheat. We're seeing multiple different problems of the gut on the rise today, in children as well as in elderly people. Everybody, really, all ages are being affected. And I think the glyphosate is a major player in that problem.
My big concern about Roundup is what it does to the gut flora. And once you've got your gut flora messed up, then digestion becomes very, very difficult.
Now, the argument in favor of using glyphosate that humans shouldn't worry about is because glyphosate only affects plants and bacteria. Okay? We are 10 times more bacteria than we are human cells. Therefore, glyphosate becomes a major issue for us to be real concerned about.
They say we don't have the shikimate pathway as humans, which is what is disrupted in plants when plants get killed by Roundup. We have that pathway through the bacteria in our gut.
The shikimate pathway is a process that happens in plants and bacteria, and it converts fructose that we consume into a compound called PEP, which then, through a series of steps, makes our beautiful aromatic proteins or amino acids, which then turn into our neurotransmitters. 90% of our neurotransmitters are made in the gut. If we don't have the bacteria that make these neurotransmitters through the shikimate pathway, then we don't have enough neurotransmitters, and therefore our brains don't work as well as they could. We don't think as well as we could.
And it's amazing how many things come from the shikimate pathway, including, for example, folate, which is an essential B vitamin, and vitamin K, and serotonin, melatonin, melanin, dopamine, epinephrine. These are all really, really important molecules in the nervous system.
This collection of more than 100 trillion bacteria that live within each and every one of us that are really ultimately determining whether we're going to be healthy or not, the balance point of our immune system, whether we have inflammation, whether we are fat or lean, and even play a role in our mood from moment to moment.
Gut microbes are adapted to the environment that the person lives in, to the diet that the person is eating.
Glyphosate wreaks havoc on our microbiome. It inhibits our ability to have access to certain important minerals because it acts as a chelating agent, and it downregulates our ability to utilize vitamin D.
Your gut flora changes more and more towards being more pathogenic and more hostile for you than friendly. It stops serving you, it becomes unbalanced more and more.
Gliadin, the gluten protein that is in wheat, has been shown to cause problem to the enterocytes in the cells lining the intestines, causing issues that may result in what we call leaky gut. And when your gut starts to leak, literally holes large enough to allow undigested protein molecules to enter the bloodstream, these open up and undigested protein molecules have an impact on the immune system.
I've published peer-reviewed journal articles on headache being related to gluten sensitivity. Dr. Marius Hadjivassiliou in England has published extensively on the neurologic consequences of non-celiac gluten-related sensitivity, including cognitive issues and difficulties with how your brain works, certainly mood issues. We have seen plenty of peer-reviewed data that even correlates schizophrenia with gluten sensitivity.
Autoimmunity requires, as we know today, three main factors. One is our genetics. Two is the environment, so the food you consume, the chemicals around you. And the third is what protects your body from the outside world, and that is the gut lining. By becoming aware of your environment, the chemicals that are in it, the way your food is produced, then you can turn on a new set of genes. You can turn on the genes for health. One of the things that you start to do is start listening to your body. Look at from the tip of your head to your little toe and scan your body as to what are the problems that are happening now. Because more often than not, what we do is we stop listening to our body and we just take a medication to dull the symptom.
If the body is whispering at you with any condition, be it a headache, rheumatoid arthritis, a skin condition, an eczema, dermatitis, then I would be looking at everything. I would be looking at what I'm putting into my body first and foremost, because we know that healthy cells grow from the inside out. But then what I'm putting on the outside is just as important to me.
So are wheat products addictive? Well, you ask someone to give them up and you look at the fear in their face. And I know that the fear comes from, well, what am I going to cook? Or what am I going to eat? I think the fear comes from, I really like eating that. Don't take that away from me. That's the one thing that gets me through the day. That's the one thing I look forward to each and every day.
Both casein and gluten can be converted in the liver to a morphine-like derivative. It's called an endorphin. And the casein one is called caseomorphine, and the gluten one is called gluteomorphine. And these substances, yes, morphine, endorphins, they go to the brain and they give a great sense of, hi, I feel great. That's why they're called highs. And the children like that feeling. They don't know they're addicted, the parents don't know they're addicted, but they've got this craving to have wheat and dairy.
We've got no shortage of calories in our food system. We've got a shortage of nutrients, not a shortage of calories. And so when you have a food that has no nutrients, but it's calorically dense, it's delicious, it triggers the same type of responses in our brain that we would get triggered from a drug, right? So we can actually see food addiction relating to highly palatable, nutrient-deficient foods. And so it makes it a really difficult food to explain how it can be so detrimental to our health because it's delicious.
The problem is when you walk down that aisle, what do you see? Gluten-free cake, gluten-free pastries, gluten-free cookies, crackers, bread, make-at-home bread, you name it. While you're gluten-free, you are pounding your body with carbohydrates, and that is wreaking havoc on your gut bacteria, on increasing risk for gut permeability, and amping up inflammation.
The market now identifying water as gluten-free. So on some level there's a dumbing down of anywhere they can slap the label on any product. It's going to make it sell better, but it's an insult to our intelligence.
Some people cannot tolerate a microgram of gluten without them setting off an inflammatory response. I'd rather see you go zero gluten. And zero gluten means that you know where each one of your individual ingredients are coming from, and you're making foods from those ingredients. So you're making the foods yourself. You're going back to our culture and tradition. Your tradition of being in the kitchen, making beautiful food from scratch.
Back to the basics versus relying on medications. Even a lot of supplements that may have gluten as an excipient may not be as good of an idea as using a culinary herb or taking in a certain type of food. So part of this calls us back to going into more of a natural way of living, a natural way of eating, where you wouldn't even consider consuming all these gluten-free labeled products because you're really making your own food. You're eating whole foods, which are intrinsically gluten-free, vegetables and high-quality, fruits and nuts.
Taking it one step further, the skin is a massive part of the body and it does absorb ingredients. But where I'd go with that is I'd be going chemical free. I'd be looking at the same principles and philosophies of going as close to nature as possible. So for me, that's cold pressed oils. That's using things like essential oils, avoiding the chemicals and anything that has numbers and any chemical component.
I think education is the key, and using yourself as a bit of a guinea pig. I mean, for instance, this documentary is about wheat. I can tell you with all honesty, if you give up wheat, you are not going to die from a deficiency from it.
At one point, my wife just said, hey, why don't you just give up grains? You're writing all this stuff about what's in them. Why don't you just try it yourself for 30 days and see what happens? And it really was that little experiment that I did about 17 years ago, where I gave up grains for 30 days, and all of a sudden that IBS that I'd suffered with my entire life, that had literally dictated how I went about my day, where was the next available bathroom on my route to wherever I was going or wherever I was. That IBS went away. The arthritis in my fingers that I was assuming was a natural artifact of getting older, that went away. I no longer got the gastroesophageal reflux. I never got the heartburn. The sinus issues that would linger after a cold or a flu went away. Imagine how many tens of millions of people are experiencing the same sort of issues and don't really know that it's as a result of food choices.
And now I switched to only organic food and personal care products. That's when the magic began. And that's when I, in the course of a year, would go from reclined wheelchair to biking 20 miles with my family. I'm so grateful for those years in the wheelchair, because without the 4 years in the wheelchair, I would not have learned all of this. And I would still be thinking that drugs and surgeries would be how we're going to create health for our country. And that could not be farther from the truth. Drugs and surgeries will not create health for the US or any westernized country or for the world. We have to go back to diet and lifestyle. We have to go back to eating this radical thing known as vegetables, lots of them, sufficient protein, not lots of protein, sufficient protein. And we need to move our bodies. We need to have a meditative practice, a supportive social network, and hopefully a loving family. That is how we create health. That's how we control healthcare costs. That's how we defeat chronic disease.
wheat isn't the problem, it's what we've done to wheat that's the problem. And I feel we need to go back to our old ways of having a veggie garden in the backyard so we know where our food is coming from. Or follow the town of Todmorden, which is an edible town where they grow food trees and food instead of pretty trees and flowers. And if we start going back to our traditional ways and we start taking an interest in how our food is produced, then perhaps we can stop this onslaught of illness that we're now seeing within our children and our adult population.
Every disease that exists on the planet is a man-made creation. Nature has not created those diseases. We have created them. And that's a wonderful news because we have the power to reverse them.
I'm very optimistic that a large part of the public is going to understand that we will not be able to medicate or operate our way back to health. The only way to get health and vitality is to go back to what really caused us to become ill in the first place, which was our diet and lifestyle choices.
The food that we eat is sending signals to our DNA, our code of life. And we can either choose to send signals that code for health or signals that code for disease. Our genetic code hasn't changed, and it's expecting that information from the foods that we've been eating for a long, long time. And again, modern agriculture has suddenly given us genetic information that our bodies just don't know how to handle.
Be gentle with the skin, be gentle with the body. It's taken a lot to bombard it. We've hurt the skin, we've hurt the body. Let's get back and start nurturing in the way nature intended. Be kind.
Become educated, become knowledgeable, become aware, start making changes step by step, habit by habit, and we may be able to create a tsunami of change that will change the health of our children and future generations.